All right, welcome. Let's start the class. All right, let's give glory and honor to the winners of the two-player NIM competition. These were all these 6 people up here. Wonder if I can make the font bigger. Nope.
The bottom right.
There we go. There we go, yes. Brandon Huck, Brennan Longstreth, Justin Salisbury, Kevin Albright, Lynn Iton, and Michael Waite. You were all able to program in the perfect strategy as described in Wikipedia. And everybody else who tried to program the perfect strategy turned out not to be perfect. It's an interesting learning experience. You can go back and look at your code and see what's different. And by perfect, this just means that whenever these players were playing against someone else, anybody else, they either won half the time because they switched back and forth between who plays first, or they won more than half the time. And then with respect to each other, they won all exactly half the time. As you can see, we had you guys play each other 250,000 times each. That's a lot. And it comes out exactly like that. So applause. You got it. Good job. Each of you got an extra 100 points on that homework. And some of you, your average for the semester is over 100. And you have another chance with the 3-player competition, which it has an ending of this coming weekend, or this Thursday, you put your stuff in. The top 10 leaderboard is currently these guys, but the TA tells me it has changed from time to time, depending on who uploads what and what your changes are. So keep uploading, keep trying, keep improving.
What was the star in the first video?
Yes, we're going to get to that. There is a star next to Michael Waite's name. So one thing that's interesting is although all 6 players had a perfect strategy, they implemented it a little differently. And sometimes there's a difference between using one quote unquote perfect move versus another with respect to the way other people will play against you. And Michael Waite was the only one that was always number 1 in the previous rounds. So here's how the rounds were played. Played everybody against everybody. Then the TA removed a few of the lowest players. And then did it again. Then removed a few of the lowest players. And did it again. 6 total rounds. And the last round revealed which players were perfect. And several of you were very, very close. And if you guys reach out to me, I'll tell you a little bit more about how you did. But in those first 5 rounds, nobody won the exact same number of games. There was always a winner in the first 5 rounds, and it was Michael Waite in those first 5 rounds. In the last round, round 6, we had 6 winners who were all tied. So once you're only playing against the best, you guys all played exactly the same, but you had different abilities to play against the larger group. And it's an interesting distinction. And Michael's strategy in this code, you guys should all go look at. He, first of all, found the finite set of you're totally going to lose positions. If you're in this position, you're totally going to lose. So what he did is he tried with every move to put his opponent in one of those positions whenever he could. It's very simple. And he did calculate a NIM sum in other situations, but typically tried to put them in one of those, you're definitely going to lose positions. And somehow that worked against the larger mass more often.
I think the one that made me with the most is that you have 1, 1, 1, 1. It's a min sum, but it's a min sum. So I tried to make the other person go that.
Well, good job. Any more questions on that? All right, well, the 3-player one, the thing that's most exciting about it is that it's not a solved problem. It's not a solved game. There is no solution out there in the world. You have to just do your best and come up with something.
So I did it with a question.
When we're doing it, because Mim is the person who loses, is the person who loses.
Yes.
Do we then play against the other person who we were playing against after that, or do we not play another game? It's just the other two win and one loses.
Well, the idea is he's gonna play enough games, everybody against everybody, until it's pretty obvious who the winner is, the one who loses the least often. Because every game has 1 loser, 2 winners. So it's a little different. And I don't know the exact method the TA will use, but he will use something that makes sense. And he may have to adapt depending on the situation. All right, so keep it up, you guys. All right, now we are going to continue with neural networks, where we discontinued last time. Okay, this is what a layer of a neural network is doing to this situation. If you remember, let's say we have in a 2-dimensional space, we have a bunch of data points. Some of them are red, some are blue. And we're trying to train a neural network to separate the red from the blue. And every neuron in a neural network, it's got a bunch of inputs and it's got one output. And that output, of course, goes through an activation function. But what you want to think about it as, it's one tiny little model. It's just a model. It's doing a lot of math. And try to think about all that math as being hidden inside the circle. Okay, so we've got a lot of math going on here. And then out of it, we get a signal. It's just a number, just one number. It's positive or negative, anything in between. And let's say that sometimes when data is coming through here, we got some, red data points coming through here. Let's say the red data points are all like, 0.2, 0.1, 0.3. And then we get some blue points coming through here, some blue input vectors. And when the data gets to this specific neuron, maybe we get a 0.6, a 0.7, 0.93. Somewhere in here, we hope to find a threshold, some number, like maybe it's 0.44. And most of the blues are above that, most of the reds are below that. Or it could be reversed. This doesn't have to actually match up with any numbers here, because it might be inside of a larger neural network with all kinds of neurons, right? And there might be more mathematical processing after. So if this is positive or negative, that could be flipped, because maybe you have a negative weight for this connection or negative weight for this connection. But what's important is that the idea is that every neuron is like a tiny machine learning model. If you have 1 million of these, basically you built an ensemble model, a machine learning model that adds, minuses, multiplies the outputs of 1 million little models. So this, since it's always a number, always looking for a threshold, and if we have 2 of them that we're considering at once, that's basically 2 thresholds, right? You could think of that as a line through 2-dimensional space. like an M and a B. So what the neural network is trying to do here as it learns, it's trying to cut through the space with a line, a straight line. Threshold here, straight line. And one of the tricks is it's able to twist and contort the space until a straight line can be drawn. That's why it's able to do functionally this, but really behind the scenes, what it's doing is this. It's contorting the space, squeezing and molding it like clay until a straight line, just an MX and B. MX plus B. You can take one of them as the M, one of the B, doesn't matter. It's all kind of mapped onto something else anyway. But that straight line separates all the red points from all the blue points. And it's trying to do this with every neuron. Now, it's going to have a tough time with this, won't it? Very tough time. No matter how you squeeze it, contort it, twist it, you cannot separate the reds from the blues. So what on earth are we supposed to do? If you have read the slides ahead of time, you might know. But I want to hear some ideas.
You do the elevation thing right there. You make it three-dimensional into like a mold and then put it.
Three-dimensional. That's the answer. Very good. Okay, now let's see what that actual neural network will look like. Well, obviously, every data point has an X and a Y, right? Or it could be X0 and X1, we'll call it, for the two axes. So let's say this neuron is X0, this neuron is X1. Well, we want to convert this to a three-dimensional space. And it's so easy with neural networks. All you do, your next layer is 3 dimensions. And you map every neuron in the layer 1 to layer 2. Now, just to make this, extra confusing, people have all kinds of ways of listing out these. We might put a 0 in the super indices, just to say which layer it's from. So now we have X1, 0, X1, 1, X1, 2. So these are the 3 dimensions of the 3-dimensional space we're going to map this onto. And guess what? Once you do that, we map it to a 3-dimensional space, then we can morph, squeeze. And guess what? Now a 2-dimensional plane in this 3-dimensional space acts as that straight line, that separator, the linear separation of things. It's such a wonderful tool, isn't it? How do we handle this? Ideas, come on, be verbal.
4 dimensions.
Yes, good job. So you would start off with 3 dimensions and you would go to 4. So this is a theoretical situation that people think happens in higher dimensions, but no one really knows. But it would suck if your data was in some higher dimensional donut shape looped together with the other class. It could happen. So just for the case that it could happen, what I almost always do is I have my second layer be at least 1 dimension higher than the first layer. Just in case. Maybe 2 dimensions higher to make it easier. So that is the deep mathematical reason I alluded to in a different class about why you want sometimes to make one of these layers wider than the first layer. All right. This is a broad overview of convolutional neural networks. These are typically used for visual systems. Now, let's consider two images of pretty much the same thing. One and image two. In image one, we've got a tree. In image two, we've got a tree. We want a neural network to recognize a tree in both images. There's differences between these images, though. How do we describe those differences?
This is off the page. So this is on screen.
You mean the tree part?
Yeah, the tree
Yeah.
part of the images.
Yeah, and incoming images might have different numbers of pixels too. So one thing you would do before putting this into your neural network is you would scale the image down or scale it up, depending. One thing that's the weakness of neural networks is once you train it with a certain number of input neurons, if you train a neural network fully and it has 7 neurons, you can't add more, not easily. You have to retrain if you add more. It gets complicated. So they're a little bit brittle in that sense. It would be like adding visual cells in the back of your eye. It would take you a while to learn how to incorporate that new information. So you have to scale these images. Now let's assume that both these images have the same exact number of pixels. This tree is a lot bigger and it's in a different place than this one. There's two kinds of differences, but we have to give them words. What words do we use to describe the two differences?
Position scale.
Yes. Is that what you were going to say? Were you raising your hand? Position and scale. So we want our neural network to work invariant of these two things. These are invariances we're looking for. Scale or size and position. Are there any other invariances we'd like? Color? That reminds me of your talk, Vincent. Because you want things to go to the same hash sometimes, right? Even if they have slightly different colorings. Otherwise, someone could steal an image and change the color just a little bit and then post it as their own, right? Same kind of thing that's going on in the neural network. In fact, the neural hash you referred to, Vincent, does have this invariance. So color. What's another one? Rotation, very good. What's another one? Shape. Describe that. Like, what if we're not trying to represent every tree, we're trying to represent just this tree?
So I was going to talk about like the leaves, but then you have the issue of the statue could have leaves. but it's not a tree, it's a statue of a tree.
Yeah, yeah. Also, when the wind blows, maybe some leaves fall off and the shape does change. Then it'll be a different image of the same tree though. But you still want to recognize the tree. Let's do slight change in shape. What about contrast? Oftentimes that's different than color, but you could relate them.
Transformation.
Transformation of like, what kind?
Well, I think I'll follow in shape, but like scale, not scale, but like transforming in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Where the shape looks a little different.
That's exactly what we're trying to get at. Yes. Using a great word for this. That's kind of a umbrella term over a couple of these, I would say.
Right. Okay.
And one other, which really only relates to taking images of the same object from different directions, would be pose. They call it pose invariance. That's a much harder one to get, but we got there eventually. Okay. Here, this is the convolution of the convolutional neural network to convolve across the image. What you do is you select a window size, a small window, much smaller than your overall image, and you're going to scan across the image. So you start at the top left usually, and you go like this, then across, and you keep going scanning like this. And you can, when you do a convolutional neural network in PyTorch or TensorFlow, one of the things you can specify is not just window size, but the step. Do you maybe have a window of 9 by 9 and you step by 2, or you can step by 1, or you can step by 3? Does that make sense? You guys all understand that concept of convolving? So what you're doing is that convolving is going into, this represents a layer, in a sense, of the neural network, okay? And that layer treats every one of those positions as a separate input. In the same way that the original image has a certain number of pixels, like let's say, 1 million pixels, then you're going to get a new 1 million pixels approximately if you have a step of 1, because you're going to step across and step down 1 and step across 1 and step down 1. You end up with window views that are about the same number, maybe not exactly. And there's a lot of details you can choose. Some people might, have the window go actually outside here with some black pixels on the edge. There's a lot of weird little choices you could make. But the point is, this window trains to learn to look for certain patterns. And maybe those patterns are things like the edge of a car, as you see here. And maybe you learn still another one. You do this once for this this represents a layer in a sense. And let's say you have another one. So you're doing 2 convolutions at a time. And let's say this other one is looking for headlights. Or over time it learns to look for headlights. Another one maybe looks for tires. And what you'll end up with, if you have an image of a car, is maybe this neuron or this little bit of a layer here, who is the one who is looking for headlights. And there are 2 places in that original image that highly activate that headlight detector. And there's another one that's looking for tires, and 2 places on that original image highly activate it. Now, in this convolution layer here, we've got a couple of neurons that are highly activated and say, hey, I've seen elements of what I was looking for that car thing we've been doing. And they pass on that information. And the pooling here is just, you take all of the answers from everywhere and you take the maximums. Like, let's say that the one that's looking for headlights, it gets 0 almost everywhere. But then it'll get high numbers around here and high numbers around here. So you want to take the maximum. It's called max pooling. And what this does, this says, if you see it anywhere, I want to know about it. And then you do it again and again. And sometimes they do it 20 times. Sometimes they do it 100 times. So you're doing convolutions on convolutions on convolutions on convolutions, or filters on filters on filters on filters is another way to describe it. We're going to look at what some of these filters actually look like. At the very end, in here, you're going to have some deeply processed representation of what was in the image. The other complexity to this all is whatever you do for black and white image, you do 3 times for a color image, RGB, you RGB separately. Or maybe you do RGB separately, then come back together. Then do RGB separately, then come back together. Or then do RGB separately, and then combine it to one mathematical representation that no longer has color, just has vectors and interesting, mathematical representations of what was in the previous layer. There's many, many ways to do this, and they all get more and more complicated. Which brings me to a point. The way most people advance the space of machine learning is they take 1 or 2 things off the shelf, just make them bigger, add 1 layer of complexity, and just make it harder and harder to understand. There's very few people out there who are coming up with brand new, unique, simple ideas that move the ball forward. That almost never happens these days, and that makes me sad. A closer look on the way convolvers or convolution works is, let's say you actually have these numbers. Maybe this is the filter you put on it. And this is actually a unique filter which sharpens whatever it's looking at. And it brings up whatever's in the middle and brings down whatever's around it. And so you have this 9 pixel region in the image. After it goes through this particular filter, you have 1 pixel in the next layer that represents the output from this process. And if you look at this, you take this 3x3 window, shift it to the right, you do that, that's going to give you a value for here. You shift it over 1 more time, that'll give you a value for here. Shift it down 1 and do this square, that gives you a value for here. And you can see how the process goes, right? This is from group theory. I want to pique your interest. If you ever want to go on a very interesting deep dive or rabbit hole on YouTube, look up videos on group theory. Especially 3 blue, 1 brown, those are really good guys. Or number file, those are guys who are great. Group theory studies the ways that things can be symmetric. If you think about a dice, you take a dice and let's say you look at it, maybe you have this, okay? If you were to flip it 90 degrees in one direction and then flip it back, obviously it goes back to the same state. But there's more complicated ways where you can get it to the same state. You could, do 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 moves like that, or you could do 1 this way, then 1 this way, then 1 this way, and get it back to the original place. There's a lot of weird ways you can do this, but once you've figured it out, what the symmetries are within this little system, that is a kind of symmetry that things in the world can have. Or if you have a snowflake, let's say you have a nice, beautiful snowflake. It's symmetric. If you flip it across this axis, or this axis, or this axis, or if you rotate it this angle, or this angle, or this angle, or this angle, or this angle. I mean, very few things have all of those symmetries, but when you look at all the objects that have those symmetries, it's not just the things that are hexagonal shaped. It's a lot of other mathematical things too, like maybe positions in a game. Anyway, this set of symmetries will have a name in group theory. The one for the cube will have a name. And people have spent decades classifying all these kinds of symmetries. When something is symmetric, that's another way to talk about invariances. Even though it was changed, it's the same. Even though it was changed, it's the same. Whoever really understands group theory and visual neural networks, that's probably where the next simple but beautiful and elegant next advancement into space will come. So rotation invariance is a little harder to handle. Convolution, like we looked at before, doesn't do it. So how do you handle rotation invariance? Like this. If someone writes the number 5 like this, or like this, you still want to be able to recognize it's the number 5. I mean, your eyes can do it. Why is it hard for a computer to do it? And more importantly, give you an idea, how would we do it? How would you make a neural network? I mean, yeah, you could probably read that whole thing at the bottom and figure it out, but I want you to think and try to guess. How would you make, add to what we saw before, that convolutional neural network? What would you add to it to make it recognize the images even if they're rotated? That's deeply connected to something we'll look at in a minute, called capsule networks. They mathematically do something. That's a very good idea, and that did come later. Talk about that. It's a very good idea. The simple first thing to do that people did was that whole convolution setup you did before. We also take our training data and we forcibly turn it a little bit. And we have a additional to everything you saw before, we add on another set of everything to handle the case where everything's rotated left or counterclockwise, maybe 30 degrees, and another one for 30 degrees clockwise.
So just re-input everything, we train it slightly, that's how we train it, so I understand foundation.
Yes, and on top of that, we triple the number of parameters in our model. If we're doing the whole thing normal, then we're doing the whole thing with, things turn a little 30 degrees, and whole thing with the input turn a little 30 degrees the other way.
So you didn't, like, if you want to have four directions, you for like four quadrants, but 4 times.
Well, it's brute force what they're doing.
I mean, it works.
Yeah, and it works. And sometimes they'll do, every 5 degrees. And someone says,
There, said you run like pattern recognition on it and then try to identify like ground. If you have to take a picture of outside at an angle or something, most of the time you look at it, you say, okay, that's the ground, therefore that's the bottom.
yes, that's a great idea. You can have a separate model that pre-processes the image to find the, vertical. What should the vertical be? That is another good strategy. That has also been done. That is good. This is obviously not the most efficient way. Some people do every 5 degrees, and there's a limit. Maybe you don't want to do more than 90 degrees. It's maybe that 5 does become another number, or it becomes something else. Who knows? Okay. When I was talking about max cooling before, think about this region, let's say 6 is the max, that will get put over there. 8, 4, just a little example of max cooling. Okay. When an image comes in, after one layer of convolution, remember I said, there'd be maybe a neuron somewhere that's looking for headlights. Another one's looking for wheels. Well, the first layers of one of these systems is not so clear. It's actually just hints of patterns. The first layers of a well-trained visual neural network, one of the early ones, this is from a number of years ago, maybe 2017. First layer, they look like this. What this means is that if you show this image or this part of a pattern gets seen by one of those neurons, then it highly activates. This neuron right here is trained to look for blink light gray, This one is trained to look for a gradient between blue and red, or a border between blue and red. This one is trained to look for, mostly white with a little bit of black in the bottom right corner. And they're all kind of random. That's just how it happened. Nobody told us to do this. We just fed in tons of data. And this is what comes out for that first layer. This right here is the second layer. What's the difference between the second layer and the first layer? It's really hard to describe, isn't it? Let's take a look at the next layer up. This is the third layer. Now you can maybe describe the difference. What's the difference between the third layer and that first layer we saw? What's that?
Just moving features.
In terms of features, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like when moving, like getting more abstract.
We're getting a little more detail here, I'd say, right? If you look at compare this to the first image. So the first layer here, you do have some cross hatching here, but most of these are either one color or two colors, and it's maybe straight lines, borders, but I don't see any circles. I don't see any curves. You guys don't see any curves in there, right? But in here, above the third layer, we're seeing curves, we're seeing circles. I mean, here's some arcs, cross hatching here, slight curve, sharper curve, almost a checkerboard type thing. This is like a taxonomy of slightly more complex shapes.
Or less colors.
Yeah, less colors for now, that's right. I mean, all the colors that are in the rainbow are in here somewhere.
But they're.
Now remember, even if the color is very faint here, a large weight later on can bring it back to the fore. But what I want you to see is that this neural network layer is written in the language of the second one. Oops, this is beyond that, of the second one. And this is written in the language of this. That's kind of what it's like, where each layer of a neural network provides the scaffolding upon which the next layer can describe what it's getting. Because this second layer, it has no direct access to the input image. It only knows what it gets from the first layer. Same thing for the third one. It only knows what it's getting from that second layer. And then this is the fourth layer. And this is actually only a part of it. It's much bigger. There's many other patterns beyond the edges that you just can't see. But look at this. These are interesting combinations of shapes and regions. These are no longer straight lines and no longer simple curves or circles. We're getting a lot more complexity. Now, here's the thing that really blew me away. We see very similar stuff emerge in rat brains. We've gone into rats and they put electrodes into the actual visual centers of the rat brain, and they see which images activated, what the rat's looking at, and which neurons are activated in that moment. And some of these, what we would call filters, exist in the neurology of the rats. So what we've come across here is the fact that if you just train your neural network to visually understand the world, it ends up converging on almost the same solution that the human and mammalian brain did. That was a seeming accident. Nobody thought that was going to happen. But it's pretty amazing. Don't you agree? Kind of cool. All right. Any questions, any thoughts? I want to hear some thoughts from you guys. Like, what about this excites you or scares you?
How close is the rock range?
Oh, very, very far. Yes. I would say the closest range to us out there is chimpanzee. Their genetics are 99.9 something similar to us. In fact, if you look at, remember, for male and female out there, there's a whole chromosome that's different among humans, the 23rd chromosome. So if you take all human males, average them, all human females, average them, and then all chimpanzees of both genders, average them, we are all as distant from each other. So males are as distant from females as any humans are from chimpanzees. What I'm trying to say is we're pretty close to chimpanzees. But very different. We have. Yes.
So this seems, or I guess a lot of the
different implementations and all that, like you talked about, they seem very computationally expensive.
Yes.
With this model, is that just kind of something you accept that this is just going to be expensive and take a while? Or I guess, how much investment do you put in optimization?
Well, you should not put any investment in optimization right now. Because you're in this phase of your career when you're trying to learn what other people did before you. However, the cool new things of the future are going to be much more optimized. And the number that really fascinates me is how mammalian brain, no matter what brain it is, does what it does in terms of accuracy per watt. The actual energy expenditure of your brain is so incredibly tiny. It's way less than your Apple Watch. It's just, you know, microamps, microvolts, microwatts, whatever. It's just so tiny. Whereas the neural networks that we were looking at are the ones that are trained to recognize images. It's so expensive. It's crazy inefficient. Now it's way better than we used to have, but it is so inefficient.
Do we want to talk about the flash drive that was the size of the classroom, but it's 1 megabyte?
Things like that used to happen, yes. In fact, in the early days of Los Alamos Research Center, they hired a bunch of women to sew. They were sewing magnetic threads into crosshatch with diagonals. And then at every one of these points, you could store 1 bit. There's either 1 or 0. And they literally sewed them by hand. And I've seen some of them. So yeah, we're getting better, but we're nowhere near a brain. One of my favorite things to look forward to is in the future, we're going to be able to cure things like color blindness by just injecting in the back of your eyes the proteins, or this, you know, the genes that encode for the proteins for all the chromatophores. In the human population, there are 3 typical chromatophores, and they are all on the X from the 23rd chromosome. So you get them from your mom only. You don't get it if you're a guy, you don't get any from your dad. Now, there's 2 versions of the yellow out there. And there's some women who have both versions. That means they have 4 chromatophores, whereas the rest of us only have 3. So they can see colors no one else can. They're called tetrachromats, but they're nothing compared to the mantis shrimp. The mantis shrimp has 13. They can see way more colors than we can imagine, but I look forward to someday getting an injection to the back of my eye so I can see with all 13 chromatophores. And will the world be more beautiful or will it be ugly? Maybe everywhere I go, I see dirt and everything and I'll be grossed out. Who knows? Anyway, class is over. Thank you so much. See you guys next time.